Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 0 to 60. I've had a bit of a cleanup in the shed today, but at lunchtime today I got a notification to tell me that it is 12 months since I fitted the 17T China turbos to my car. The Chinese turbos have been probably one of the biggest draws to subscribers to the channel. They're to guys that aren't heavily into the modding scene, like I wasn't when I ordered my Chinese turbos. They are very appealing because they've got all the big power numbers. They look good, they look shiny, and they're cheap. I remember thinking it's $1,500 for 700 horsepower. Poof, let's do it. I mean, there was more that went into it, but they definitely suck a lot of people in, and I know our videos suck a lot of people in because they're curious about these turbos and if they think they should be fitting them. I'll just talk about these two engines quickly. We have our fifth or sixth n54 here. It came out of a parts car. And I thought it'd be a good explanation, a good visual demonstration of something that you may need to be doing if you're going to be chasing big power with your n54, because I'm trying to stockpile these engines because they don't last forever. Here I have my original 17T motor. This ran with the 17Ts for about 2,000 or 3,000 Ks, I think. Please correct me if I'm wrong, it could be 5,000. But it eventually lost compression on cylinder 4. That was not because of the 17Ts, it was because of a water pump issue. But it does also highlight that if you're going to be playing with these cars, you need to expect issues. So don't get sucked into the cheap price of the turbos, because there's so much more that goes into modifying an N54. Before I even talk about turbos, if you're watching this video thinking about modifying your N54, do yourself a favor and make sure that every bit of maintenance is up to spec. Don't bother winding your boost up if you've got an oil filter housing that's leaking oil. Get all the oil leaks fixed. Even if you build it into when you start doing your modifications. Like with this motor, when I first got it, it had quite a bad oil pan gasket leak. So when I fitted my downpipes, I did the oil pan gasket at the same time because I was going to be in there. It made sense to do it at the same time. But don't put maintenance stuff off to the side. Do it either before you do your mods or whilst you're doing your power mods, because it will come to bite you in the ass. There are so many threads on the internet of people chasing misfire issues or boost leak issues because they haven't done vacuum lines. I've been one of those threads. Yeah, just make sure that everything is working as it should before you think about spending money, especially if you're on a budget. And let's be real, these Chinese turbos are all about doing things on a budget. It's just, yeah, a lot of people do get caught out with them. So once you're comfortable, or you've at least got a plan for the maintenance on your N54, there's probably going to be two reasons that you're going to be changing your turbos. Firstly, the original ones have failed, or they're, well, not failed, but there's basically wastegate rattle's a huge issue. People take them off because they get too noisy. They don't hold boost, normally a side effect of the wastegate rattle, or they'll be leaking oil. Yeah, there's a few reasons that the original turbos fail. They all seem to fail eventually, especially if you're running them at 15 to 18 psi, thanks to MHD, which is what pretty much everyone does these days. So you're going to be replacing these. But if you're not chasing big power with the new turbos, if you're running it at that 450 crank horsepower, which is like a stage 2 OTS tune, I think the Chinese turbos are an absolute no-brainer. Don't even overthink it. Just put them on. You will need to get a custom tune for the hybrid turbos. Well, you should anyway. I know there are guys that run them on MHD OTS maps with no issues, but you really should get a custom tune, just to make sure all the wastegate duties and everything are dialed in and you're not over boosting. But you'll make that 450 horsepower at the crank pretty easy with a set of the hybrids, the Chinese hybrids. They'll be stressed less than these, and they'll also stress the engine a lot less. And when I say stress the engine a lot less, people still are, like, they don't understand what's going on. When this motor actually popped, I had at least 5 people message me and say, this has failed because of the Chinese turbos. With the twin turbo setups on the N54s, they are some of the smallest turbos on a twin turbo or a 3-litre engine. And the reality is, when you've got, keep in mind, my car rolled 625 wheel horsepower. So if you split that between the two cylinders, you've got over 300 horsepower on each bank of the engine. So you've got 300 horsepower trying to squeeze through this little section of exhaust right there. And that is when things just get super hot and they melt. And guys were messaging me saying that this motor's failed because of the restrictive exhaust housings. And I have actually seen cutaways of stock turbos versus the Chinese turbos. And this little section here is actually smaller on the Chinese turbo than it is on these. Now, don't get me wrong, they still work. They still make a lot of boost, but you've got restrictions that you need to keep in mind. And those restrictions cause heat to build up in the motor. So keep that in mind. And maybe it's not a problem at 500 wheel horsepower, but at 600 wheel horsepower, things are getting hot, and that's where you're going to back up things in your engine. But I've gone around in a massive loop. Keep in mind, take it away, 450 horsepower, Chinese turbos, fit them, enjoy them, stock fuel system, it's going to be great. If you want to go big power, like I did, if you want to chase that 600 wheel horsepower, like I did, like a lot of you guys copy my build, this is where it gets a bit difficult, because all of a sudden, the $1,500 or $1,000 for the turbos becomes pretty insignificant compared to what you spend. I mean, on making my car go fast, including the turbos, fuel system, intercooler, intake, I've spent about $5 grand, which isn't that much money, but there's $5 grand's worth of power mods on the car, including things like coils and spark plugs. That's what it's cost me to go fast. That includes my second-hand fuel system that I got. That's pretty good. But on top of that, I reckon I've spent nearly 1,500 Australian making my transmission work properly. That includes XHP, replacing all the solenoids, the O-rings, serviced it like 4 times to get it to shift properly. But that's $1,500 I spent on the transmission that I wasn't even thinking about, but I needed to do that to make it all work, make it shift properly. Once you've got the transmission snapping through the gears and holding the power, which I think those 6ATs, they seem to hold it all right if you look after them, you then need to do a diff. You can obviously run the car with 600 horsepower with an open diff, but you're missing out on a lot of potential of the car. So I went to an LSD. I got the LSD cheap. I think it cost me, I spent $800 on the clutched center, and then it cost me about another $200 to buy the seals, gaskets, to actually get it into my diff housing, not to mention like a day's work of working out how to fit a diff center. So yeah, that was another $1,000. That was doing it cheap. To buy an off-the-shelf diff, you're looking at like $2,200, but you do need the diff. Once you've got the diff, you'll start snapping axles. I've snapped 2 axles now, one on each side of the car. Never snapped axles when I was open diff, but as soon as I went to LSD and it couldn't unload by spinning a wheel, it puts the force through the axles and bam, we snap an axle. The cost of the 17Ts is very deceiving. That's what I wanted to take away. Mine have been pretty good. I've got a little bit of wastegate rattle, like a little bit, and a few guys have picked up on it in the videos. I don't actually notice it when I drive the car. As soon as you shut the door, like if you start the car with the door shut, you don't hear it. But if I ever start the car with the camera outside, you guys seem to pick up on it. So yes, there is a little bit of wastegate rattle. Should that deter you? No. I've given mine a very, very hard time. When this engine popped, who knows how hot it all got when the water pump wasn't working. Has that hurt that back turbo? When I actually took the 17Ts off of this engine, there was a fair bit of oil in that back turbo. And I have got boost issues with it not quite hitting target, which I'm thinking things just aren't quite right around the wastegate on that back. But I don't think that's necessarily an issue of the 17Ts. That's just a result of a hot event that happened with this engine. But things like that you need to keep in mind. All of a sudden, it's like, should I bought the better turbos with all the billet wastegate wheels and all that, the wastegate flappers, would that have not been susceptible to the issue that my current one's got? It really is a bit of a tough situation. People that follow the channel will know that the Vargas car that we have, its Vargas turbos have come to the end of their life. This is not a dig at Vargas at all. Those turbos, we don't know how old they are. They're stage 2 OG Vargas turbos, which interestingly, actually no, they are different. They have these housings, so they're modified factory turbos, those ones. But yeah, they won't hold boost. It's just weird how they boost. They could be like physically damaged. But yeah, they won't make over 18 PSI and they don't make boost under 4,000 RPM. We went through weeks of trying to work out with them, but we've got to replace those turbos. And me and David have been sort of tossing up whether to throw another set of Chinese turbos on. Just going to touch on it quickly. 17T versus 19T, there's not much of a difference. Some people quote that the 19T spool up 500 RPMs later. The actual size in the wheels is, I think the only difference is the exhaust wheel is like 1.5 mil bigger. They actually, or the compressor wheel. There's only one wheel that's different. They're not like a true 19T. Personally, I think if you're a manual car running pump fuel, go the 17s. If you're an automatic car, go the 19s. But don't sweat over whether to go 17T or 19T. As we saw with my car on the dyno a couple of weeks ago, the 17Ts will still make 600 wheel horsepower. It's pretty wild. So yeah, don't stress about it too much. But back to the Vargas car. should we just put another set of Chinese turbos on and run it like my car? And we sort of tossed and turned, and we nearly did just go the Chinese route. But the issue with it is, to set that car up properly, it needs a fuel system. It does actually have a diff, but the gearbox is going to need a full service. It's going to need solenoids, so we'll spend over $1,000 on the gearbox. It needs a transmission cooler. It needs the ignition coils sorted out. It's just got old elders on it, whether we put new elders on or upgrade to the B58 coils, which I'm doing to my car, by the way. It never ends. We're going to end up spending $5 or $6 on that car to make it work with the turbos anyway. So should we spend a little bit more on getting a better turbo? And we have decided to. We've decided to go with the DAW Flowmax. But I wanted to go with those because they are properly balanced. You've actually got a fairly decent warranty with DAW. Yes, they are definitely a lot more expensive than the Chinese options, but at least you're dealing with a proper company. And we're not going to be left with that feeling. And the biggest catch with my turbos are, and if you've been following the channel, I've been talking about going single for 6 months now. The 17Ts make great power. You go and race some cars, you get some cool draggy numbers, you feel like you've got a 10-inch penis, but you want more. That's the biggest catch with these Chinese turbos. The cost of the Chinese turbos is very insignificant in relation to what you're going to spend on setting your N54 up. Just spend a bit more money. That's my take on it. Get the better turbos, whether you go single or a twin system. I think you're better off just doing it right the first time. The two lovely gentlemen in the 0 to 60 chat that have recently upgraded their turbos, it'll be interesting to see how long they last with the Chinese turbos before they want more. But I reckon they're going to go down a similar path, because at the time of fitting the Chinese turbos to this engine, there was no way I was going to spend $4 to $5 on a turbo setup. 12 months of ownership of a 17T car, $4 or $5 seems like a bargain to get a little bit more power. This is the reality of it. You end up spending so much money on the car to make it all work. The turbos are very insignificant. And honestly, just do it right. Do it right the first time. So if you're going to be chasing ultimate power, buy whatever turbos your budget will allow, or wait until you can actually afford to get the right turbos. If you want to run 450 horsepower at the crank on pump fuel, China, I think that's the way to go. Sorry to all the brand name turbos that might disagree with me, or anyone that disagrees with me. This is just my opinion. But yeah, that's my takeaway. I think the Chinese turbos, their place is for the true budget builds where they're sub 500 wheel horsepower, and they're guys that maybe daily drive their cars. They haven't gone too crazy with the modifications. But if you're going crazy with mods, if you've got a fuel system, if you've got a diff, if you're doing the transmission, if you're chasing the big numbers, if you're trying to race the car, that's where the Chinese turbos just don't make sense to me anymore, because you're better off just getting the better option instead of buying it twice like I'm going to, because I will be paying probably another $8,000 to $10,000 for a single turbo setup to replace my 17Ts a little bit over a year after putting the 17Ts on. So yeah, anyway, that's my takeaway from it. I don't know how long this video is. 13 minutes. Shit. Sorry it's gone on for so long. Yeah, hopefully the GoPro went flat. Yeah, hopefully there's some information there for you guys to take away. That was just genuinely off the cuff. That is my take on my experience. But the biggest thing is, these Chinese turbos, they will hook you in. They will give you the bug. You will want more. And the turbos is such a small part of the cost of setting these N54s up. You need to be aware of that. Don't think you're going to be able to bolt these $1,500 turbos on and have a hell of a lot of fun for years to come, because the money keeps getting spent. So my personal opinion is spend a little bit more, get the turbos that'll flow a little bit better. As I was saying earlier, when this engine failed, a lot of people, not a lot, but there was a few people that said it's failed because of the China turbo housings and I should have upgraded to a larger housing. That's what we're doing with the Vargas car. Those exhaust housing on the Flowmaxes, they'll just be stressing the engine less at that 600 to 700 wheel horsepower figure. And that's what I like. It genuinely worries me with my car at 600 wheel horsepower. How long is the motor going to last before it gets too hot? Because I don't run meth. Yeah, I'm at the limits of the 17Ts. And I want more. It's the bug. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.